to my YouTube channel. My name is Brianne from the blog Prudent Balance, and I need to make some bread. So I figured I would take you guys along with me and show you guys how to make the perfect loaf of artisan sourdough bread. And now that I have my go-to method down, it's super duper simple and I don't stress over it anymore. I just go into it, I know what I'm doing, and I just get my scale, I get my bowl, and a couple other things, and I'm ready to go. I'm ready to make some bread. So I fed my sourdough starter earlier this morning and it is nice and active and bubbly and ready to go. So that is step one. Now I will say I have definitely baked sourdough bread without freshly feeding it. So as long as it's been less than 48 hours of you feeding your sourdough starter, then it's safe to use. If it's been longer than 48 hours, then go ahead and just freshen it maybe the night before if it's cool enough in your house. It's pretty warm in our house. It's like 74 degrees. So I usually just feed mine the morning of that I plan on making bread. And a good indicator is if you take it out of the fridge and you can still see a presence of a lot of bubbles on the top of the surface, then it's probably okay to make bread with right out of the fridge. That's my kind of rule of thumb. I know other people may have a different rule. I've heard people they don't even feed their starter, they just take it right out of the fridge and they make bread with it. And it may take longer that way. I'm sure it does work, but it's probably just going to take longer. So yeah, go ahead and get some sourdough starter. I'm gonna grab a large bowl. I'm just gonna do one loaf. It's just me, my husband, stepdaughter, and then our baby. So we don't eat bread too fast, but I just wanted to make one loaf for today. So since I'm taking you guys along with me, I usually use 3 blends of flour. Usually a bread flour, a rye, and then lately I've been doing a whole grain einkorn as well. But today I'm just going to use mostly bread flour and a little bit of rye. So you're going to want a baking scale. This is just going to ensure that everything is measured out properly and accurately and that we don't have any kind of rookie mistakes. So I do like to use my baking scale as much as I've made this recipe. That's still gonna be essential. So I am gonna measure out a bit of water. We need, depending on how hydrated your starter is, you can always start with a little bit of water. If it's super hydrated, like my starter's pretty hydrated today, so we're gonna start with a cup and a half, and we're gonna start with a cup and a half plus 1 tablespoon. So usually I just do a little over a cup and a half. And we'll just kind of eyeball it because there's a certain consistency you want to go for with the dough. And so I'm going to go ahead and measure out some water, get it in the kettle, get it warmed up, and then we can start our bread. All right, so we want to heat that up until it's just warm. So kind of just keep an eye on it. I usually dip my finger in it every minute or so just to check on it. So this is a Dutch oven method. You can do open air baking, but you definitely won't get that nice springy loaf that you see in the pictures and in videos. So for the method I'm showing you guys today, we are going to be using a Dutch oven. I just use my cast iron Dutch oven, got it off Amazon, and it comes in handy. So I'm gonna measure out 75 grams of sourdough starter. Depending on the temperature of your house is going to be dependent on how much sourdough starter you wanna add. Normally it's between 50 to 100 grams of starter. If it's warmer in your house, like for my house it's 74, so I'm gonna add in 75 grams. I definitely could do 50 for like a 6 to 8 hour bulk rise, usually more like 6 hours in this house, but I'm gonna do 75 just because I want it to bulk ferment a little quicker. So our scale is on, we have our bowl on, just make sure it's zeroed out and on the grams mode, and we are just gonna measure out 75 grams. Now, if it goes a little over while you're dumping it out like this, don't worry about it. Alternatively, you could also do, so 50 grams is equivalent to about 1/4 cup of starter. So depending on, you know, the temperature of your home, you could do 1/4 cup for 50 grams. You could do 1/2 cup for 100 grams. So we got 75 grams. Let's see. Our water is perfect. So I'm just gonna go ahead and clear this out. I believe it's 225 grams of water. Let's see. Yeah, so we're gonna do 225 grams of water, or 226. Doesn't necessarily have to be exact, you guys. Because like I said, we're going for a consistency here. So I'm just gonna add in my salt as well. So I'm gonna clear that out, and we're gonna do usually between 9 and 12 grams of salt is perfect for one loaf. I usually just do like 10. All right, 10 grams of salt. Now we are just gonna give it a whisk. I'm just gonna turn this off for a moment, and we're just gonna whisk it together. Super simple first step. Water, salt, and our wild yeast. Give it a good whisk. Turning the scale back on, make sure that's zeroed out, and we are gonna do, I'm going to do, so you can definitely do all bread flour if you wanted, but I'm gonna do 400 grams of bread flour. Ooh, a lot more than I wanted. All right, perfect. And followed by 100 grams of rye. Now you might wonder, why add rye? Well, rye, not only does it add a delicious and distinct flavor and texture to your baked goods, but it also is a powerhouse of nutrition. So rye is whole grain flour as opposed to bread flour or all purpose, which is just that. It's plain white flour. A lot of the nutrients are just naturally stripped out through the sifting process. So adding back in a little bit of whole grain is definitely going to add to the nutrition of your sourdough. And personally, I just love the flavor and that nice kind of rustic texture that you get from adding in a whole grain. So we've added in all of our ingredients. Super simple, right? So now you could do this 2 different ways. You could have put all of these ingredients into a stand mixer, which I have done plenty of times, or you can just throw it all into a bowl, get yourself a spoon, and I don't want to get dough stuck in there. That would be annoying. So I'm gonna just get my favorite wooden spoon, and we're just gonna give this a mix. And once it starts to come together, you can either keep mixing until it's nice, kind of a stretchy, shaggy dough, or you can go in with your hands, which I'm gonna go in with my hands because I like to work the gluten in so that you get a nice just development of the gluten before we let it rest. So I'm gonna go ahead and go in with my hand. All right, so I'm just gonna kind of knead it with my hands just to make sure that all of our flour and water gets absorbed. Based off the feeling of this dough, I think I'm gonna add a bit more water. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead. So this is kind of thick for the dough. So based off that look, it's telling me that we need a little bit more moisture in our bread because we don't want to end up with a dense loaf per se. Now dense can mean nutrient dense, like if you did a whole wheat bread, but we're not doing whole wheat. We have bread flour in here, so we want it to be lighter in texture. And so I'm gonna go ahead and add in a little bit more water. Don't worry about warming the water up again, since we already added our warm water with the sourdough starter. That's perfectly fine. All right, we're gonna get as much of the dough off of our hands as possible. Don't worry about getting all of it. I know it can be a little stressful. All right, now this next step is crucial. So we are going to let the gluten rest. We're gonna let obviously the whole entire dough rest for about an hour. I'm gonna set my timer, and then we'll come back and we will do our first stretch and fold. And I'll show you guys what that looks like. I'm just gonna cover the dough with a plate. You can do a plate or a towel or parchment paper. It really doesn't matter. And then we'll come back to this in an hour. So it has been an hour, my timer just went off. And so that process was called an autolaze, which is just where you let your dough rest for an hour before you come back to the bowl and start your stretch and fold. So we are gonna start our first stretch and fold, and I'll show you guys. It's super simple. I have a bit of water here just so that the dough doesn't stick to my hands as much. So we start by dipping our hands in our water. We're gonna start with one corner of the dough and kind of dig under it a little bit, and then grab the dough with your thumb in the center, pull up and kind of stretch it, and then you're gonna fold it toward the center. And we're gonna just repeat that on all four corners. Just pulling it up, stretching it, and folding it in. Okay. Same thing. So this is building structure. That is, simply put, what stretching and folding does. It just further develops the gluten and helps to build structure. So that is our first set. And so we will let this continue to sit, and I'll put the plate back on, and then we will come back to it in about a half an hour. You don't have to be exact. As long as you do, I usually aim for 3 sets total of stretch and folds before we just let it sit in bulk ferment. So in about a half an hour, we'll come back and do another one. And then around another half hour after that, we'll do our last one, and then we'll let it bulk ferment. All right, so it's been actually closer to an hour. Me and baby girl ended up going for a walk. So I'm now gonna perform my second stretch and fold. So same thing, we are just starting with one corner, pulling the dough upward, and as you can see, it's getting a lot more elastic. So that's a great sign. That just shows that our dough is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So just working our way around the bowl for a total of 4 stretch and folds to complete one set. I did add a bit more water to this dough just because I thought the consistency was not as moist, or not as moist as I would like it to be. So this, I think, is perfect. So yeah, just gonna go ahead and cover this back up, and we'll come back in about another half hour for the last stretch and fold. All right, you guys, so the bread has been bulk fermenting at about 73, 74 degrees for 6.5 hours now. I think a little over that. So it should not quite double in size, but come to about 50 to 60% its original size. So this looks perfect. I'm just gonna go ahead and lightly flour our surface, and then I'm gonna show you guys my simple method on how I shape the dough. We're just gonna lightly dust with some flour, very lightly. Probably a little lighter than this. And we're just gonna turn our dough out onto our floured surface. All right, our dough is out, and it is a little sticky to touch, so you could lightly water your hands. I think I'm gonna grab a little bit of water just to work with the dough. All right, so I grabbed a bit of water. You can put some on your fingertips. That'll just help so that the dough doesn't stick to your hands too much. So I'm just gonna start with the dough, and I do have a bench scraper. This will help if your dough is too sticky. So I will use it if I need to. If not, I'm just gonna leave it here. Okay, so essentially I am just going to gently spread out my dough. I'm gonna be using a loaf style Banneton basket. So if you're gonna use a bowl, that's fine. You may just end up shaping it a little differently. But, let me see. And you'll notice some nice air bubbles. We're gonna try to not mess too much with what's going on inside of there, because that's what's gonna give our bread that nice rise. All right, so now that I've spread out my dough, I'm just going to take each corner. We're gonna start at the top and fold it in the center. Same with the left-hand corner, and then we're gonna move to the center and fold in the center again. And we're gonna move to the bottom and fold again. All right, now we are just gonna take the bottom, and I'm just gonna add a little bit of flour here just in case, and I'll use my bench scraper as we roll up. So essentially I just wanna tuck and roll the dough. So we are just lightly tucking it together as we roll it upward. Use your bench scraper if you need to, just so that you don't mess too much with. All right, from there, gently pull it towards you. I'm gonna lightly flour my hands again. And from here, you can just shape it with your hand and just kind of use, I'll be honest, you guys, I'm still getting good at using your bench scraper to shape. I usually just use my hands, but it's kind of like a tuck and roll process. And you'll start to notice it comes together. And once it looks like a nice loaf shape, which this looks great, doesn't have to be perfect. All right, it's ready to go into the Banneton basket. So I'm just gonna add a little bit more flour on top so that when you flip it into the Banneton basket, it won't stick. So use your bench scraper again, go underneath and give it a nice flip. And look at that, that looks beautiful. So you don't have to chill your bread. If you wanted to, you could just leave it here, let it rest for another hour or two until it gets a little puffy. But I highly, highly recommend cold fermenting, cold proofing in the fridge, preferably overnight, but 24 hours is definitely going to be optimal so that you can get that really nice oven spring. I find that that is where the bread is just really nice as far as the texture and the flavor. So I'm going to throw this into the fridge. I'm going to get a grocery bag and just slide it in there, and yeah, it'll just sit in the fridge and we'll come back to it tomorrow. All right, you guys, so it is the next day. It has been about 21 hours. The bread has been cold fermenting or cold proofing in the fridge. So I have my cast iron Dutch oven preheating in the oven. The oven is preheated at 450. I like to preheat my Dutch oven beforehand because when it's nice and hot and you add the bread in there and then you put the lid on, it really just helps it to expand in the oven even more. So I'm going to show you guys one of the ways that you can score your bread. There's tons of different ways that you could score your bread. I'm just going to do a super simple score and I'll show you guys what I usually do, but you can definitely feel free to get creative here. I've seen some beautiful looking loaves where people just really hone in and pay attention to detail on some of their breads, so you can really have fun here. But I'm about to take the Dutch oven out of the oven and we can get our bread going. All right, so when flipping out your bread onto parchment, just try to aim for the center. Or you could even hold it like this, center it, and then flip it out onto your hand and lay it down. Since it's been in the fridge, that won't mess up the shape. All right, so this is our loaf. This is what almost 24 hours of cold proofing looks like. And you really won't be able to tell what that's doing until we get it in the oven. At this point, before we score, if you'd like, you can add a little bit of flour on top. This makes it look pretty, and when you take it out of the oven, it gives it that nice bakery look to it. So I just rub some bread flour on top. Really, any flour is fine. And make sure your scoring tool is sharp before you begin. There was a tool that they gave me to use this with, but I don't really like how it handles, so I just hold it. Just be very careful because of course it's very sharp. So I just do a super simple score. I start in the middle. I just come down about a quarter of an inch in depth, and I do another on the side. So this is how I'm doing it. Like I said, you guys can feel free to do it however you'd like, as long as you do one, because this will help it to expand. And yeah, definitely want to score your bread. So yeah, I keep it real simple. That's how I'm going to score it. At this point, I'm going to take the Dutch oven out of the oven very carefully because it's super hot. Your Dutch oven might be a little smoky. Mine normally is, so don't be alarmed. Very hot in there. Now, I like to add an ice cube in with mine because it really helps it to expand even more beautifully in the oven. We're just going to carefully transfer this to our hot Dutch oven. I just drop it in there. And then I like to take an ice cube and add it right along the side. Want to make sure it doesn't get in with the bread. Place your lid back on, and it's ready to go into the oven. So I'm going to put mine into the oven for about 20 minutes, and then we'll take the lid off and let it go for another 15, depending on how you like your crust. So I like mine pretty dark, so whatever your preference is. So after about 20 to 25 minutes in the oven at 450, I go ahead and I remove the Dutch oven from the oven, and I'm gonna turn my heat down to 425, remove the lid so that way we can develop a nice crust. And I like to go for a deeper brown color. Depending on what you'd like, leave it in the oven for another 10 to 15 minutes, maybe a lighter crust or maybe a darker crust. And after that 10 or 15 minutes, I take the bread out of the oven. It is ready and it is looking beautiful. Go ahead and put that onto a cooling rack. That way the crust won't get soggy on the bottom. And yeah, so this is my go-to method for artesian sourdough bread. As you can see, got that beautiful ear right there, and you can see that expansion within the bread. So you don't have to get this fancy, you don't have to do the ice cube, but if you'd like to, you definitely can. So thank you guys so much for tuning in, and if you guys want to see more content like this, then be sure to follow along with me. Until next time.